welcome to The Debate. We are diving into a truly challenging and, frankly, alarming description of Washington, D.C., a city painted in our source material not just as flawed, but as a total failure, a, quote, cesspool of drunkenness, debauchery, warring, homosexuality, municipal corruption, and public apathy. It is even labeled the dirtiest community in America.
A stark assessment indeed. And what makes this discussion particularly crucial, I think, is figuring out the root cause of that described decay. Protected crime, sophisticated racketeering, public plundering happening right there in the seat of American power.
Precisely. So we're asking today, what fundamentally drives this widespread failure? Is the primary factor enabling all this crime and corruption the inherent flaws and sort of political insulation of DC's governance structure itself? Or is it the unique, transient, and financially flush nature of its socioeconomic population? I'll be arguing that the political and legal mechanisms governing the city are fundamentally broken, almost designed for inaction, effectively providing a shield for criminals.
And I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. I maintain that the extraordinary social and economic dynamics here create such a massive, frankly irresistible market for vice fueled by huge amounts of money and a kind of pervasive indifference that almost any system of governance, no matter how perfectly structured on paper, would likely be overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the demand and the wealth driving it.
Okay, so my position centers on what I see as structural sabotage, starting right from the city's political birth. Washington, D.C. is described in our source as a bastard born of a compromise, holding a political status pretty much equivalent to an Indian reservation. It's inherently unstable because its ultimate governing body, Congress, is essentially absent. This body shows a, quote, lethargy of mind, spirit, and body when it comes to actual local public affairs. Crucially, when local corruption does surface, congressmen who are the true lords of the city, they just shrug, is the word used. Why? Because they face zero local political accountability. This detachment pretty much guarantees that the system designed to govern the city has absolutely no local incentive to improve itself or even enforce its own laws effectively.
Right.
And beyond the legislature, the enforcement mechanisms themselves seem fundamentally broken by design. Take the judicial system. It's staffed predominantly by federal judges who are political appointees, many described as fuzzy-minded intellectuals, and they're notoriously lenient. The source material gives examples of judges often discharging prisoners without even hearing defense evidence, humiliating police officers in court, and issuing suspended sentences for serious narcotics violations. Their stated belief, apparently, is that they do not believe in punishment, particularly for minority defendants. Well, this creates a functional environment of absolute impunity. The system feels rigged to shield criminals and discourage the police.
That's a compelling point about the court's leniency, I grant you, but I would frame that leniency itself possibly as a reaction to, or maybe just a natural feature of, a population whose economic profile makes them uniquely prone to vice on a scale that just defies easy local control. While judicial softness is undoubtedly an issue, I don't think it could create the volume of crime we see described without the vast economic fuels supplied by this city's very unique demographic makeup. Washington is an economic anomaly. It has, quote, no industries but one, government, and it's inhabited, as the source says, by 800,000 economic parasites and an acquisitive horde of getters and gimmiers. These people largely have no real civic stake or long-term interest in the community itself. They're just there.
Okay.
And consider the sheer financial fuel constantly circulating. The average family income cited is $1,820 per capita, which was drastically higher than the national average of $1,330 at the time. This wealth is perpetually replenished by lobbyists with, quote, no-limit expense accounts and, foreign representatives spending freely. This massive, high-velocity capital ensures a relentless, high-demand market for basically every type of vice you can imagine. This market, in turn, fuels these huge rackets, which are operated by local overseers for mafia absentee landlords sitting comfortably back in New York. The population is transient, provincial in outlook, despite being cosmopolitan, and so it lacks any strong moral or civic constituency to fight the very vice that serves this wealthy economic ecosystem.
But surely if the law enforced itself rigorously, that acquisitive horde, as you call them, would find the risks unacceptable. The judicial sabotage perpetuated by an absentee Congress, that's the root issue here, making the size of the market almost irrelevant. Vice simply cannot thrive if the legal consequence is certain and severe.
I appreciate the focus on accountability, I do, but I worry we might be looking at the symptom, judicial weakness, rather than the scale of the disease itself, which is this irresistible economic demand. Even if the judges were perfectly rigorous, the sheer economic reality here ensures that corruption will follow the money. The financial stakes are just too high, the opportunities too plentiful.
We see evidence of judicial mockery, as you acknowledge, like that judge who ordered a robbery victim to pay half of the prostitute's $25 fine, declaring the man was as guilty as the woman. Or the U.S. Attorney's Office refusing to prosecute a man found with an unlicensed pistol because apparently he was a nice guy who didn't actually shoot his victim. This just screams institutional incompetence, or worse, active sabotage.
Okay, but let's look at the sheer scale of the criminal element already present, which is actively utilizing the easy targets provided by this wealthy, transient population. The 1949 arrest statistics for what are called Part 1 felonies, these are the most serious index crimes like murder, rape, assault, robbery, they're stark. There were 8,800 arrests of black individuals versus 2,705 arrests of white individuals, showing these massive imbalances, especially in violent crime categories. Now, this demonstrates a huge existing and very active criminal class that capitalizes on the demographic situation and the, easy pickings afforded by a wealthy, disconnected populace. The judicial leniency you point to, I think it only exacerbates a pre-existing condition of massive criminal opportunity driven by social instability and readily available wealth.
But that evidence of large-scale criminal activity just underscores my argument. When the system is structurally designed to shirk responsibility, this type of judicial negligence becomes inevitable, not some kind of outlier. And the police are handicapped not just by soft courts, but by law enforcement's own chaotic structure. The city operates not one, but several overlapping and often conflicting police forces. You've got Capitol Police, White House Police, Park Police, Metropolitan Police, and others. This complex web seems almost explicitly designed for confusion and non-cooperation.
You correctly highlight the fragmentation of law enforcement, definitely. But I'd argue that the organized crime here, the big stuff, gambling, dope, prostitution, it works despite the police structure, mainly because it's controlled by a powerful national syndicate, the mafia, which operates at a completely different level. The source notes the mafia prefers not to show its bloody hands openly in the capital, right? Instead, they work through extremely sophisticated local lieutenants and fixers.
Like Charlie Forth?
Exactly. Like Charlie Ford, the local lawyer mentioned, who runs this whole jail-thwarting apparatus. Ford's organization defends intercepted prostitutes, works closely with bail bond brokers, and maintains legal contacts right up to the topmost figures of the mafia hierarchy. The Metropolitan Police, or really any single police force, they're simply overwhelmed by this powerful, organized, and absentee-controlled structure that funnels its money out to New York, Chicago, even Rome, apparently. The source of the crime, I argue, is the financial demand, not which specific agency controls which patch of sidewalk.
But the fragmentation is precisely the systemic vulnerability that the mafia exploits. If law enforcement were unified, coherent, it could actually focus its energy. Instead, the system inherently ensures inaction. The Metropolitan Police are continually being diverted for all sorts of special non-policing tasks, guarding dignitaries, acting as ushers at tea parties, providing police escorts for, quote, expectant mothers with the drag. And simultaneously, they're hobbled by state-level laws that prevent them from even serving warrants directly, forcing them to rely on U.S. Marshals. So when a crime occurs in what the source calls a borderline case, say along the road to National Airport where multiple federal and state jurisdictions converge, the result is both sides duck. The law enforcement architecture itself makes it physically and legally almost impossible to bring consistent, unified pressure on sophisticated criminal rings, whether they're national or local. The system itself provides the legal loopholes for these large syndicates to operate within.
Okay, let's shift slightly then. Thinking about the underlying moral climate, it's pretty clear the city harbors a level of widespread moral decay that has to be considered as part of this overall failure picture.
It certainly does. And from my perspective, this decay is structural and seems institutionally protected, particularly within the political class itself. We read about the constant and continuous soprano symphony of homosexual twittering in Lafayette Park, literally less than 100 yards from the president's front door. The fact that high-ranking Army officers apparently formed what was known as the Ferry Brigade in the Pentagon, engaging in scandalously abnormal acts, and this resulted only in quiet transfers, not prosecution or punishment, well, that indicates an institutionalized lawlessness and cover-up. It feeds right into the general atmosphere of moral decay and protected deviance. The sheer volume of known homosexuals reported on the government payroll, at least 6,000 known deviants according to the source, demonstrates this systemic lack of accountability right within the government offices themselves.
I see why you tie that social deviation back to the political structure, definitely. But let me offer a different perspective on that. I see this kind of social nonconformity you describe as almost secondary to the city's main economic engine, which is material and sexual acquisition tied directly to political influence.
Explain that.
Well, the core vice driver, I believe, is the unique demographic imbalance, coupled with the sheer amount of money floating around. Washington has this extraordinary surplus, 100,000 more nubile women than men, according to the text. This leads to routine physical frustration for what are called G-girls, government employees, often young women, who turn to part-time prostitution, apparently not for the money but for adventure. This flood of amateur competition drives street prostitution prices down dramatically. The source mentions as low as a $5 asking price in places like Sailor's Row.
Right.
But the economic elite drives the high end of the market. You have high-level officials maintaining full-time kept women in expensive apartments around DuPont Circle. You have lobbyists utilizing so-called company girls, often New York models, imported for $200 a night plus expenses, specifically for entertaining dignitaries. The vice that truly defines D.C. in this view is driven by immense wealth and the necessary accoutrements of political influence, which demands a high-quality, high-volume supply of sex and pleasure that simply overwhelms civic order. The widespread deviance you pointed out is perhaps just a consequence of a highly transactional, transient population whose primary interest is political power and self-enrichment, not upholding some specific moral code.
Well, I maintain that the city's profound and deeply entrenched problems are perpetuated by a unique structural failure, primarily an absentee government Congress operating through politically appointed, demonstrably lenient federal judges, and a patchwork of non-cooperative, fragmented police forces. This fundamentally dysfunctional system provides a clear, legal shield, allowing vice rings, corruption, and the resulting public apathy to flourish, essentially unchecked by accountability, regardless of how much disposable income the population might hold. Accountability and effective enforcement have to come first.
And I still insist that the scale and the unique nature of the crime described are generated primarily by the city's inherent economic role. It acts as a magnet for wealthy, disconnected parasites and lobbyists, coupled with this socially frustrated transient workforce. This creates a relentless high-demand market for virtually every form of vice imaginable, ensuring that even a theoretically perfected governance structure would face truly unprecedented challenges in maintaining civic order. The problem, I think, starts with the money and the kind of people it attracts, which inevitably corrupts any system put in place, rather than originating solely from the police manual or the court docket.
It seems the source material forces us to recognize that Washington, D.C.'s failure, as described here, might be a kind of perfect, terrible synergy, where a governmental structure seemingly designed for confusion meets a society almost purely designed for acquisition.
Yes, analyzing that complex relationship between structural failures and, well, human nature's demands seems crucial to really understanding the decay described in this place called the dirtiest community in America. There's certainly more to unpack there.